Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Lunch with Larry series. I appreciate you coming to our next of a 4-session series here. We're going to be talking about operational excellence. I think we have an excellent discussion for you today. Looking forward to talking with Cisco Vicenty from the FDA. So just a little bit about the series and some contact information. If you want to get a hold of us, this is, of course, my contact information, phone number, LinkedIn groups. Also, we have a QR code here for anyone in your organization who's interested in this webinar series. So if you wanted to, the next topics are going to be centered around design transfer, production simulation, and then, of course, manufacturing execution at the end, along with this session today. So this is going to be the 4 sessions that we have coming forward. So if you want anyone to have access or come to the webinar series, feel free to share the QR code or this link, and they can register for the series as we go forward. So looking forward to having everyone on the call. And so thanks for coming. So today, very excited to have Cisco, and let me get this set over. Cisco Vicenty is works, of course, at the FDA. He's a program manager for a Case for Quality, and really pleased to have him on today. And maybe, Cisco, you could provide a little context, maybe some a better idea for the audience of what you do at the FDA and kind of what the category you fit is. So if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity, Larry, and the rest of the Siemens team to kind of have this chance to engage and maybe provide a little bit more context about some of the things that we're trying to do right now at the FDA and where our focus is. As you mentioned, right now I am the program manager for our Case Equality efforts within the FDA. For those who are familiar, some of this might be rehash or repeat, but for those who aren't, our Case Equality effort is really a broad term and all-encompassing initiative that is focused on really trying to change the dynamic, the collaboration, it's just the state of being within the whole med device industry and the whole healthcare ecosystem. It is a really broad collaborative activity, of which there are several sub-activities that the agency has been engaged on to help drive or incentivize certain shifts in direction one way or the other. You know, the real point of all this is to really bring the state of everybody's focus back towards the quality of the product, the patient outcomes, and move it away from the focus that there was on compliance, really enable more of the data and the digital collection to help drive and improve manufacturing processes, the product as a whole, to bring in the voice of other stakeholders, and to really help incentivize and reward those companies who are trying to move past that compliance baseline. It really is a broad initiative that I think engages the agency on willing to put themselves out there and take a risk and trust on the companies that are doing the right things. At the same time, the companies that trust that the agency is going to not react the way we typically do when, you know, the unexpected happens. The focus is also really on driving other supporting practices, right? We're talking about things like how do we drive more interest, more engagement, more adoption of the advanced manufacturing, not just the technologies, but the practices that go along with it. More simulation use throughout the whole product lifecycle design, so on and so forth. Things that I think we're really talking about a little bit as we go through the course of maybe this session and maybe that you guys have planned for future sessions.
Sure. So, just first of all, thanks for taking the time during what must be a really busy time in the FDA with all the activity around the COVID-19 pandemic. So maybe given all the progress at the FDA that the Case for Quality has made over the past couple of years, you could help us understand how your programs developed during the crisis. What are the things that you're doing to react to that crisis?
So there's, as I mentioned, lots of different things that are in the pipeline and in different states of trying to address an issue. I think one of the things that I've learned at the very least through the engagement is there is so much potential in things that we can do that every single time we think we are moving in one direction and we hit a barrier or a wall, and before we can move to where we want to be, we have to stop, address that barrier, and then progress. But things that we've been able to do through our case equality efforts and that collaboration and partnership, we've really piloted, and it's now in the state of becoming an operational program, our voluntary improvement program, the VIP program, which is really about a completely different engagement mode and a more quality maturity focused assessment of an organization, all geared towards continuous improvement, right? How do we continue to incentivize and drive that? We are driving a lot of initiatives right now on advanced manufacturing, promoting the use of those practices, the technologies, and really trying to clear the path for that. The center has prioritized some of the supporting activities for that. For example, work that we're doing on our computer software assurance guidance that is geared towards really resetting and re-leveling the expectation around the validation activities that's required for a lot of these tools and technologies that are used in support of production. So as we progress, and we've been learning a lot throughout these engagements, there are things that we've seen and started tackling. For example, the idea of these technologies being used, digitalization being used all the way from the inception of the product all the way through its production phases. How much of that is not being really adopted within the med device industry, things that we could do to shift that piece. We've seen, just even in light of the COVID-19 practices, how the impact of the medical devices state of being right now, where it is really, for lack of a better word, because it's going to reduce it down to a very simple construct and concept, but there's a lot more to it than that. Paper-based. Everything is all about that documentation that was needed to kind of prove your regulatory compliance, and not the focus on the value it has towards the product, process, the customer. That's having an impact. We're seeing some of the slowdowns. We're seeing some of the inability to quickly flex and move and shift to the changing requirements and production demands that are happening right now. There is, just even concerns with how the regulations view changes that need to be made quickly to adjust to that piece. So there's a lot of opportunity that we've got here to address as we move forward.
Sure. So during the crisis, I would imagine that there's when companies start to see this kind of pressure, it starts to reveal cracks in current systems. So maybe you could give us some idea of specific gaps that have surfaced or become visible that you'd like to see the FDA and manufacturers work together to address. Any thoughts on specific gaps? Maybe a couple examples.
Oh, definitely. One of the easiest ones to address is just the data, basically. I mean, it's really that information set, that detail about the product in a quick and easy, accessible format, right? That will allow for changes to be made quickly, rapidly, and communicated to us as an agency rapidly, so that the company as a whole or the product can adjust to the current state. That's a huge gap that I think we're trying to figure out how to address and tackle, right? The idea that a lot of the information kind of resides in the very locked down scenarios, and changing them is difficult from the manufacturer's side. Plus, our processes tend to be a little bit more, for lack of a better word, restrictive. They can slow things down a bit. So trying to enable more flexibility between that on our end. But that's also going to be predicated on the capabilities that are demonstrated by the manufacturer coming through. So that's a big one that we're dealing with. One of the things that came up in light of the recent challenges was even just considering the impact of the use of additional technologies. There was a lot of stuff and discussed early on in the outbreak of this where people were trying to leverage, additive manufacturing, 3D printing to help resolve some of the issues in supply that we were encountering. But really being able to link all that back, and it goes back to that data connection that I was mentioning beforehand, to the risk, monitoring that real life outside the company, right? Really understanding what's the state of play within the use conditions, and being able to respond quickly to that is a significant gap we've been trying to tackle for a while. And addressing that is going to be the key to a lot of other, I think, abilities that we as an agency are able to engage in, such as accelerating some of this innovation through our review processes. But it's driving that closed loop piece that it's a big effort that we need to do. And it's not a simple turn on the switch situation. There's a lot that as an agency, like I said, we keep hitting a wall here and there that has just evolved over decades of engagement that we need to shift and reset before we can move to the next level in progression.
Sure. It seems as though the industry kind of thinks of design transfer as an example as a literal movement of documents, and it sounds like your view of this is more related to maybe transfer of understanding, maybe a data-centric view rather than sort of a document transfer view. So maybe you could expand on what you might define as a gap.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way to even level set what at least we've seen from the approach and concept. And I know, again, going back to the idea, this isn't a one size fits all. It's just a broad application of what we've seen. The idea of design transfer, it seems like it's evolved to be this point in time activity where all this work that was done in design gets moved into now its manufacturing stages. Some of that, again, evolved just simply because it's easier to demonstrate, especially from a regulatory standpoint and a compliance standpoint. Those stages, you've got distinct delineations between them. But what we're talking about in the gap that we're trying to really get to and address is that the intent behind that was for it to be this integrated, more living activity, right? Which, as you mentioned, is more about that transfer of understanding, that information engaged from both sides, that needs to happen and is probably always happening, especially as changes are evolving as the products actually go and get out into the field and there's learning or unanticipated activities that go on, making sure that is communicated back in the right people from both the manufacturing side, from the servicing activities, from the even the marketing efforts that go on with it, and the development people are coming together and at the table and really having that more real-time exchange of that knowledge and learning. It's one example of what we see happening just across the board with regards to how the quality system has evolved and been applied and established, which it seems to be missing that integration that was intended when we talk about that whole system approach.
Sure. And maybe, as we're coming out of this COVID shutdown, and either, production's ramping up for people in that they have huge volumes they have to deal with, or we're rebooting for more elective surgery kind of setups. Do you have any thoughts on best practices for either design transfer or manufacturing execution to mitigate some of this manufacturing risk? Do you have any thoughts there?
So there is a wide range of ways to address, and I don't want to state that you have to always go through and deal with this through a technology route, but the reality of the matter is it's the best capability and solution you've got right now, because anything else is very manual. But there's a lot that I think manufacturers can be taken more advantage of in terms of trying to deal and manage that manufacturing risk, right? How to categorize it a little bit better. Is it material control, right? How are they really aware of the state of the materials that they've got after being down manufacturing, or slowdowns that are going on there? Staff who may have not been in rotation, or they have to rotate through, or there's social distancing activities that go on that impact the way the production is, that need to be accounted for. There's a lot of potential for being able to, and I think from my standpoint, model that activity, right? Leverage more of that is to really understand what the impact is going to be and really address where your pain points are and target that. Oftentimes what is a more behavioral or communication activity that needs to be engaged to make sure it is a seamless transition into what would be a new state of operating based on the current expectations. There's, just a full consideration of changes that might need to be made within the processing right now, and how to make sure that you're accounting for, the risks that it may introduce. Again, if it's all very manual, that's a very, very tedious process, and oftentimes things do get missed and slipped. The more that those connections are made in a digital format, the more they're easy to trace that connectivity through, the less of a chance that there's going to be an error that introduces more risk in manufacturing. So I think part of what we are looking for, or what I would recommend, is that really companies spend a little bit of time and think through that living risk cycle that I think we're all expecting within the med device space. The more that is refreshed and referenced through this, I think the better they'll be able to manage and mitigate the risks as they're ramping up and bringing things into production now. It's, again, that's probably the best way to approach it. Very manual if it's not in a data format or digitized, but doable. And again, if we're talking really what's best practices, if you look at other industries, as we've been learning through our advanced manufacturing engagements and efforts, when it is, all digital and very well connected, that is almost a very seamless and error-proof activity. You make a change here, it kind of cascades and reflects through all that.
Yeah, you bet. So I know one of your concerns is related to the burden necessary for manufacturers to provide this, excellent product. Maybe you could expand on how the FDA is trying to address, providing the agility and flexibility needed to react to problems in the field or speed the design release.
One of the things that the agency has taken on across the board, and that really is in light of what we saw through the recent crisis also, is a more renewed focus on really the advanced manufacturing and the application across that in every aspect of the industries that we regulate as an agency. But in particular here, when we're talking about medical devices, it's that ability to really implement some of those better processes, methods, practices, and technologies that'll help, provide more control, more speed in information, a lot more visibility into things that are going on, and how where they're going wrong so you can react before they turn into a bigger issue. But from an agency standpoint, what we're trying to do is really clear the path for ways to get that type of process, technology, or methodology really implemented within organizations, right? How do we either provide guidance that clears a barrier here? How do we incentivize or reduce the regulatory burden to implement some of these models, concepts within an organization? We are really trying to think broadly and outside the box with regards to how we enable manufacturers to really begin to implement and apply these things, which will be beneficial to them, beneficial to the patient down the road by reducing the burden. I think we've understood that they actually, from a benefit risk standpoint, provide a lot more benefit than the risk that we've been trying to manage from this end. So we've been working on, things that will make it easier to apply. And the more recent effort that we've started with regards to our advanced manufacturing clearinghouse activities, which is something that has initiated now. We're starting with initial project, but how do we help bring these types of practices and really partner up with industry collaborators or even academic collaborators or other government agencies to help get these practices into the med device space, put them into a practical application, these efforts and technologies. FDA would be part of the process solution going forward with that, and then trying to make that a broad example that can then be replicated and applied by other manufacturers as they move forward, and the agency would accept, that method or process without a additional or a significant regulatory submission or review timeline requirement around it. So there's a lot that I think we've been trying to do.
Yeah, you bet. So one of the questions from the field is, how do you define advanced manufacturing? Does it include data sets from upstream systems like PLM? So that's an interesting definition of terms question. Yeah.
That's perfect, because actually we recently had just got a message telling us this is what our FDA definition for advanced manufacturing was going to be. But it does include a lot of that, right? It includes all that information, all that technology, all that data that resides not just in the upstream state, but I think even what we're talking about and want to get to is as it's out in the field, right? How does that feed back in, and how do we factor in that information into the thinking, the processes, and the agency's responses to what that information is really telling us. But I think what definition we've been talking about from advanced manufacturing, it's the activities that develop a new paradigm, methods, processes, or equipment for new or existing manufacturing products, materials, supply chain components, and that provide an advantage over existing techniques or tools. They reduce time to market, enable new performance attributes, improve small batch production, cost savings, energy savings, or reduce the environmental impact, along with improving product quality.
Yeah, that's a broad set, isn't it?
So it's a broad set.
So on one hand, we need this agile, flexible process, but on the other hand, there's a sense sort of that the FDA requires strict control. And just one of my questions is, do you see these being as conflicting, or do you have any thoughts on how to achieve both? And I'll just throw the other question that came up. It says, does the FDA recommend any specific technologies to support and optimize integration lifecycle management tools? So I know you don't make recommendations. There's lots of ways to cut at this thing. So, but kind of in all of that, it'd be interesting to see what your thoughts on, the flexibility or the balance between flexibility and strict control.
Yeah, I think that one's, let me quickly, because I think you're correct. You stated it correctly. We don't really recommend or endorse any particular technology on that end, because a lot of it is all able to meet or sustain the need and your intended use. It always goes back down to what is it that you're intending to do with it, and will it fulfill that piece of it, and will it do it for you quickly and reliably. But the idea that you just discussed there, because it's something that I think we, even internally, are making sure we try to come to grips with, right? The idea of that flexibility, that ability to adjust and adapt. The way, I think collectively, we've been targeting and treating things right now from a control standpoint with the regulations. People are reading this degree of process. It really is what it's about that's required to sustain a stable, validated quality system. And when you talk about that in that terms, right, you're talking about that established stability, that level of process that's in place, and deviations from that become problematic. So when you think about flexibility and agility, that obviously is in contrast to that. But I think one of the things that we want to talk about and really reset the thinking about when we talk about what the regulations are doing, it's what is their intent, right? And their intent is to demonstrate really, or give you the basis for being able to demonstrate that you are in a state of control. The flexibility and agility can still be achieved, and you can still demonstrate that state of control, because that's really what it's about. But it does take a lot more of that process to be very well integrated, right? Because you're now talking about the control being in that awareness, that visibility, that speed to respond, so that you can demonstrate that as you shift in this quickly, or you have the flexibility to move here, your process is still going to be monitored. It's still going to be accounted for. It's still going to be able to output a product that is, safe, effective, and of high quality. So it is that piece of it, that state of control of what is leaving and getting into the hands of the users, that I think we want to try to bring the focus back to. And that will enable, I think, everybody to have the piece of flexibility to start implementing more of these technologies, which will help drive that integration, that connection, to start really thinking in terms of not documents that are generated, but data and understanding and information that is of value, that is used throughout that process to really enable that end product control.
Sure.
Seems like the real idea of all the regs is stability, right? What was that?
No, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I just one of the thoughts that I had was so much of this is visibility. Can you see what you're looking at? Do the systems that you have provide you with that visibility? But maybe it would just with regard to how companies build and design medical devices, how they're going to go about the business of fulfilling the FDA charter. If you had a magic wand or maybe 3 wishes, what would you want industry to focus on? Is there any parting thoughts that you have on things that are important to you?
Oh, easily. I think one of the things that we're even starting right now, and it's part of one of our initial, we talk about clearinghouse activities, it's the idea of enabling that companies right now, and we talk about adapting technology, the first focus is how do we take everything that they've got right now and start to turn it into a digital format, right? How do we start connecting everything digitally through data across that spectrum of the product lifecycle? If I had a magic wand, that would be the first focus area, because that's the stepping stone to a lot of other capabilities, to a lot of other ways to demonstrate the control, to demonstrate fulfillment of the regulations, which I think allows us to be a lot more, I think, flexible in terms of our responses, and I think also to really think outside the box with regards to how do we, accelerate or bring products that are built under those conditions back to market in a faster time frame. We want people to have access to products built in that activity. So if I had one wand, that would be the piece that I would focus everybody on right now, is how do we change the mindset in the med device industry right now from the current paper focus to all just data. It shouldn't be a piece of paper anywhere. It should all just be connected data.
All right, well, fantastic. Hey, I just, once again, a hearty thank you for spending some time with us. We're at our half an hour session here, get people back to work after their lunch break, and so thank you for your time with us. Operational excellence is the rest of the series here, so we're going to have the next ones on design transfer, then we're going to go to manufacturing simulation, and finally manufacturing execution. So we'll talk a lot about this digital traceability that kind of runs through the whole process. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Cisco, for your time. And look forward to talking to you at the next session. So thanks so much. We'll take care.
Thank you, there.
You bet.
Bye.